The dust had barely settled on the auction block when Samuel Abbott realized the woman he had just purchased for $300 was trembling not from fear, but from rage. Hill City, South Dakota, sprawled out before them in the afternoon heat of 1876, a ramshackle collection of wooden buildings that had sprung up like weeds after gold was discovered in the Black Hills. Samuel had arrived 2 weeks earlier with enough money from a cattle drive to start fresh, but he had not expected to spend most of it on a woman at a debt auction. The banker, a portly man named Henderson, had explained that she owed money to half the merchants in town and was being sold to settle her accounts. It happened sometimes in these rough places where law was more suggestion than certainty. Samuel studied her as they walked away from the crowd. She wore a faded calico dress that had seen better days, and her dark hair was pinned up in a hasty bun with wisps escaping around her face. She was perhaps 22 or 23, close to his own 25 years, with sharp green eyes that darted around like a cornered animal seeking escape. He noticed she kept one hand pressed against her side, clutching something beneath the fabric. "What is your name?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle despite her obvious hostility. "Why does it matter?" Her voice was rough, catching slightly as if she had not spoken much recently. "Because I need to call you something." They reached his horse, a sturdy roan mare he had named Copper. "I am Samuel Abbott." She looked at him then, really looked, as if trying to assess what kind of man would buy a woman at auction. He knew what she would see. A tall man with sun-weathered skin, brown hair that needed cutting, wearing trail-worn clothes that were clean but patched. Nothing special, nothing threatening either, he hoped. "Beatrice," she finally said. "Beatrice Zimmerman." "Well, Miss Zimmerman, I have a room at the boarding house. You can stay there tonight, and tomorrow we will figure out what comes next." Her eyes narrowed. "What comes next? You bought me. Do not pretend this is anything other than what it is." Samuel felt heat rise to his face. "I bought your debt, not you. No man can own another person. That is not who I am." "Then you are a fool," she said quietly, but some of the hardness left her expression. They walked through Hill City's main street in uncomfortable silence. The town was bustling with miners, gamblers, and opportunists of every variety. Women were scarce here, which had likely made Beatrice's situation even more precarious. Samuel nodded to a few men he recognized from the saloon, trying to ignore their curious stares. The boarding house was run by a German widow named Mrs. Halst, who took one look at Beatrice and made assumptions Samuel could read clearly on her weathered face. Before she could speak, he said firmly, "Miss Zimmerman needs a room, separate from mine." Mrs. Halst's eyebrows rose, but she nodded. "That will cost extra. I understand." Samuel counted out coins he could not really afford to spend. Once Beatrice was settled in a small room at the end of the hall, Samuel retreated to his own quarters and sat heavily on the narrow bed. What had he done? He had come to the Black Hills to start a ranch, to build something of his own after years of working other men's cattle. Instead, he had spent his stake on a woman who looked at him like he might strike her at any moment. He had acted on impulse when he saw her on that block, saw the way men were bidding and the gleam in their eyes. It had reminded him too much of his own mother, sold away from his father when Samuel was just a boy, back when such things were legal. The memory still burned. He could not save his mother, but he could save this woman, even if she did not understand that was what he had done. A knock at his door startled him from his thoughts. Samuel opened it to find Beatrice standing there, her face pale but determined. In her hand, she held a folded piece of paper. "I need to show you something," she said, "before you hear it from someone else." She stepped into his room, closing the door behind her with a quick glance down the hallway. Then she unfolded the paper and held it out to him. It was a wanted poster. The face sketched on it was rough but recognizable. Beatrice Zimmerman herself, wanted for robbery and murder in Cheyenne, Wyoming territory. The reward was $500. Samuel's hand shook slightly as he took the poster. "Is this why you were clutching your side when we left the auction?" She nodded, her jaw tight. "I have been hiding it for weeks. When Henderson seized my belongings, I managed to keep this one thing because I needed to know if anyone had seen it, needed to destroy it if I got the chance." "Did you do it?" Samuel asked, meeting her eyes. "The robbery and murder." "The robbery, yes." Her voice was steady now, as if saying it aloud was a relief. "The murder, no, that was my brother. Jacob was his name. He shot a man during the robbery, shot him in cold blood when he did not need to. I tried to stop him, tried to get the gun away, but it was too late." She moved to the small window, looking out at the darkening street below. "Jacob was older than me by 6 years. After our parents died of cholera, he raised me as best he could. He was not a bad man, not at first, but something changed in him after the war. He came back different, angry all the time. When he said we were going to rob that store in Cheyenne, I thought we would just take money and leave. No one was supposed to get hurt." "Where is your brother now?" Samuel asked. "Dead. Shot by a marshal 3 days later while I escaped." "I have been running ever since. 6 months now. When I got to Hill City, I thought maybe I could disappear here, with all the chaos of the gold rush. I got work at the general store, was doing well enough until the owner's son decided he wanted more from me than I was willing to give. When I refused him, he told his father I was stealing. I was not, but his word counted more than mine. That is how I ended up in debt to everyone, and then on that auction block." Samuel folded the poster carefully and set it on his small table. His mind raced through possibilities, consequences, and the right thing to do versus the easy thing. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you can turn me in and make money on this. Get back what you spent on me and then some. I thought it was only fair, you know." She turned from the window, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. "I have been lied to enough in my life. I did not want to lie to you, not when you just spent everything you had." The vulnerability in her voice struck him hard. Here was a woman who expected betrayal, who had probably faced it repeatedly, yet she was choosing honesty anyway. Samuel stood and crossed to where she was standing. He picked up the poster, walked to the small stove in the corner of his room, and opened the iron door. The embers inside were still glowing from earlier. He placed the poster into the stove and watched it catch fire, the paper curling and blackening until Beatrice's sketched face was nothing but ash. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Making a choice," Samuel said. "I do not believe in kicking someone when they are down. You made a mistake, following your brother into that robbery. But you did not kill anyone, and you have been punished enough." Beatrice's hands came up to cover her face, and her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Samuel stood awkwardly, uncertain if he should comfort her or give her space. Finally, she lowered her hands and wiped at her eyes with the back of her wrist. "Thank you," she said. "I do not even know what else to say, just thank you." "You can start by telling me the truth about everything else," Samuel said gently. "If we are going to figure out what comes next, I need to know who might be looking for you, what other trouble might come our way." They sat together for the next hour, Beatrice talking in fits and starts about her life. She had been born in Ohio, lost her parents at 14, and followed Jacob west when he said there were opportunities. She had learned to shoot because Jacob insisted, learned to ride because it was necessary. The robbery had been their first real crime, though Jacob had been involved in smaller schemes before. She had kept hoping he would straighten out, go back to being the brother who had sung her to sleep when she was small and scared. He died thinking I hated him, Beatrice said softly. We argued before he went after that marshal. I told him I wished I had never followed him west. Those were the last words I ever said to him. He knew you loved him, Samuel said. Brothers and sisters fight. That does not erase everything that came before. She gave him a sad smile. You sound like you know something about that. I had a sister, Samuel admitted. Younger than me. She died of fever when she was 8. I had been mean to her that morning because she borrowed my fishing pole without asking. Spent years wishing I could take it back. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two people bound by old grief and new circumstances. Finally, Beatrice stood. I should go back to my room. Mrs. Halst will already be making assumptions. Let her, Samuel said. We know the truth. But as Beatrice left, closing the door softly behind her, Samuel wondered what the truth really was. He had saved a wanted woman, destroyed evidence of her crime, and tied his fate to hers in ways he was only beginning to understand. If anyone discovered who she really was, he could be charged as an accomplice. Yet when he thought about turning her in, collecting that reward money, the idea made him feel sick. He had looked into her eyes and seen someone who had made mistakes but was not beyond redemption. He had seen someone worth saving. The next morning, Samuel woke to find Hill City buzzing with news. Another wanted poster had arrived in town, this one for a gang that had been terrorizing stage coaches between Deadwood and Cheyenne. The marshal was organizing a group to go after them, and suddenly, everyone was talking about outlaws and justice and reward money. Samuel found Beatrice in the boarding house dining room, sitting alone at a corner table with untouched food in front of her. Her face was ashen. Did you hear? She asked quietly as he sat down. About the gang. Yes. What if someone else has that poster of me? What if there are more copies? It was a valid concern. Wanted posters were distributed widely, and while Hill City was still relatively isolated, more people were arriving daily. Samuel had been thinking about this problem since he woke. We need to give you a new story, he said. Something believable that explains why you are here with me. What kind of story? Samuel took a breath, knowing his next words would change everything. We tell people we are engaged. That I came to Hill City to make money so we could start a ranch together. You followed me here from Omaha because you could not wait any longer to be with me. Beatrice stared at him. People will want to know details, about my family, about us, about everything. Then we create details. We spend today learning everything about each other, building a history that makes sense. By tomorrow, we can tell the same story without contradicting each other. You would do that, pretend to be engaged to a wanted woman. I would do that to protect someone who deserves a second chance, Samuel said firmly. But Beatrice, you need to understand what this means. We would have to act like a couple in public. Eventually, we might have to actually marry to make it convincing. And if we are discovered, I will be in as much trouble as you. She searched his face for a long moment. Why are you doing this, really? We do not even know each other. Samuel had asked himself the same question throughout the long night. My mother was sold away from my father before I was born, he said slowly. Slavery stole any chance they had at happiness. When the war came, my father joined up, thinking if we won, he could find her again. He died at Shiloh. I was 13. I have spent my whole life watching people treat other people as property, as things to be used and discarded. When I saw you on that block yesterday, I saw another person being stripped of choice. Maybe I cannot fix the world, but I could do something about that one moment. And now that I know your story, I want to keep doing something, because you deserve better than running forever. Beatrice's eyes filled with tears again, but she blinked them back. I do not even know if I can be the person you think I am. Then we will figure it out together. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. It was the first time she had willingly touched him, and Samuel felt the warmth of it spread through his chest. "All right," she said. "Let us build a story." They spent the entire day together, walking the outskirts of town where they could talk freely. Samuel told her about his childhood in Missouri, about working on various ranches after his father died, about saving every penny for 8 years to afford his own land. Beatrice told him about growing up in Ohio, about the small farm her parents had owned, about her mother teaching her to sew and her father teaching her to read. They invented their engagement story carefully. They had met in Omaha 2 years ago when Samuel was passing through on a cattle drive. He had been dining at a restaurant where she worked as a waitress. They had fallen in love over the course of his week-long stay. He had promised to send for her once he made enough money for them to start a life together. When he got the opportunity to come to the Black Hills, he had written her, telling her to wait just a little longer. But she had been impatient, worried something would happen to him, so she had used her savings to make the journey herself. "That explains why I arrived with no money," Beatrice said as they walked along a creek outside of town. "I spent it all getting here." "And why you were desperate enough to take work at the general store," Samuel added. "You were looking for me but did not know exactly where I was." They practiced telling the story to each other, refining details, making sure their version of events was consistent. By sunset, they could recount their fictional romance as easily as if it had really happened. It was strange, Samuel thought, how the lies they were creating felt like they were building something real between them. That evening, they returned to the boarding house and asked Mrs. Halst to join them in the parlor. The widow sat in her favorite chair, her knitting in her lap, as Samuel and Beatrice sat together on the worn sofa. "Mrs. Halst," Samuel began, "I need to apologize for any confusion yesterday. Beatrice is my fiancée. We have been engaged for nearly a year and she traveled here to join me." Mrs. Halst's stern expression softened considerably. "Why did you not say so from the start?" "I was embarrassed," Beatrice said, her voice carrying just the right note of shame. "I knew Samuel wanted to wait until he had saved more money. By coming here without telling him, by ending up in such a difficult situation, I felt like I had ruined his plans. When he bought my debt at that auction, I was mortified that he had to spend his savings that way." "Oh, you poor dear," Mrs. Halst said, her accent thickening with emotion. "Love makes us do foolish things sometimes. But you are together now, yes?" "Yes," Samuel said, reaching over to take Beatrice's hand. The gesture felt natural now after their day of practice. "And we will be married as soon as the circuit preacher comes through town again." Mrs. Halst beamed. "This is wonderful news. I will not charge you extra for the second room after all. It is clear you are respectable people." After Mrs. Halst left them, Beatrice let out a shaky laugh. "She believed us." "You were convincing," Samuel said, still holding her hand. "So were you." She did not pull away, and they sat there for a moment, both suddenly aware that the line between pretense and reality was already beginning to blur. The next few weeks established a pattern. Samuel found work helping to build new structures in the rapidly growing town, while Beatrice took in sewing and mending. They were careful to be seen together regularly, walking to church on Sundays, having dinner at the local restaurant, conducting themselves as an engaged couple would. The people of Hill City accepted their story without question, happy to have another respectable woman in a town full of rough men. But it was the small, private moments that changed everything. The morning Samuel brought Beatrice coffee before she was fully awake, remembering she liked it strong and black. The evening she repaired his shirt with tiny, careful stitches that made the tear almost invisible. The day it rained and they stood under the overhang of the general store together, watching water pour from the sky, and Samuel realized he was happy in a way he had not been in years. He was falling in love with her, not with the story they had created, but with the real woman. The one who hummed while she sewed, who had a sharp wit and could make him laugh with a single dry comment. The one who sometimes woke from nightmares and he could hear crying through the thin walls, but who faced each day with determination and grace. The one who was slowly learning to trust again, to believe that maybe her life could be more than running and hiding. One evening in late May, nearly a month after he had bought her debt, Samuel invited Beatrice to walk with him up into the hills outside town. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that made the whole world look golden. They climbed to a spot where they could see Hill City spread out below them, small and temporary against the vast landscape. "I have been thinking," Samuel said, his heart pounding, "about us. About this arrangement we made." Beatrice tensed beside him, having second thoughts. No, the opposite. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "When we first made this plan, it was just to protect you, to give you a cover story that would keep you safe. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being just pretend for me. Beatrice, I have fallen in love with you. The real you, not the story we tell people. And I need to know if there is any chance you might feel the same way." She was quiet for so long that Samuel's heart sank. Then she squeezed his hands tightly. "I feel the same way," she whispered. "But Samuel, I am terrified. What if my past catches up with us? What if I bring danger to you? You could still walk away, find a woman without a wanted poster hanging over her head." "I do not want to walk away," Samuel said firmly. "Whatever comes, we face it together. That is what love means." Beatrice looked up at him then, her green eyes bright with emotion. "Then yes, I love you too. I think I have for a while now, but I was afraid to admit it." Samuel pulled her close and kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. It felt like a promise, like a beginning, like everything they had been building toward. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "Marry me," Samuel said. "Not for the story we tell people, but for real. Marry me because you want to build a life together." "Yes," Beatrice said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married 3 days later by the circuit preacher, a kindly old man who had been traveling between mining camps for years. Mrs. Halst cried through the entire ceremony, which took place in the boarding house parlor with a handful of witnesses. Beatrice wore a simple blue dress she had sewn herself, and Samuel wore his best clothes, cleaned and pressed. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed his bride with all the love and hope he had been carrying. Their wedding night was tender and careful, both of them navigating intimacy with gentleness and care. Samuel had never been with a woman before, and Beatrice admitted shyly that she had not either. They learned each other slowly, with whispered endearments and soft laughter when things were awkward. By morning, they were truly bound together in every way that mattered. The next few months were the happiest of Samuel's life. He and Beatrice saved every penny, planning for the ranch they would start together. They found land south of Hill City, a beautiful valley with a creek running through it and good grass for cattle. Samuel began building a cabin there, working every spare moment, while Beatrice continued taking in sewing work to add to their savings. They fell into an easy rhythm as husband and wife. Samuel loved coming home to find Beatrice cooking dinner, loved the way she greeted him with a kiss and a smile. She loved his steady presence, his quiet strength, the way he made her feel safe for the first time since Jacob had died. At night, they would lie together in their bed at the boarding house, talking about their dreams and fears, building a future from words and hope. But the past has a way of finding you, no matter how carefully you hide. It was a hot afternoon in August when a federal marshal named Garrett rode into Hill City. Samuel was working on the cabin when one of the town boys ran up, breathless. "Mr. Abbott, there is a marshal in town asking questions about a woman wanted for murder in Cheyenne. He has a poster with a picture on it." Samuel's blood turned to ice. "Where is my wife?" "At the boarding house, I think." Samuel ran. He ran faster than he had ever moved in his life, his boots pounding the dusty street, his heart threatening to burst from his chest. He had to get to Beatrice, had to warn her, had to figure out what they were going to do. He found her in their room, folding laundry with the window open to catch any breeze. The moment she saw his face, she knew. "He is here," she said. It was not a question. "A federal marshal. He has a poster. We need to run." Beatrice set down the shirt she had been folding, her hands trembling. "Where would we go? He will track us, and you will be wanted too for helping me escape." "Samuel, I cannot do that to you." "Then what are we supposed to do? Let him take you." "Hang you for something you did not do," she came to him, placing her hands on his chest. "Maybe it is time to stop running. Maybe I need to face this, tell the truth about what really happened." "They will not believe you," Samuel said desperately. "A woman's word against a dead man who cannot defend himself. With robbery already proven, Beatrice, they will hang you." "Maybe," she said quietly, "but maybe not. And if I run now, I will be running forever. We will be running forever, never able to settle, never able to have the life we have been planning, always looking over our shoulders. Is that what you want?" Samuel wanted to argue, to insist they could disappear into the wilderness, build a life where no one would find them. But he knew she was right. The running would never end, and eventually they would be caught. At least if they faced this now, there was a chance, however small, of clearing her name. "We do this together," he said firmly. "I will get a lawyer, the best one I can find. I will testify about your character, get others to do the same. We will fight this with everything we have." A knock at the door made them both jump. "Mr. Abbott, Miss Zimmerman." The voice was deep and authoritative. "This is Marshal Garrett. I need to speak with you." Samuel opened the door slowly. The marshal was a tall man in his 40s with steel gray hair and hard eyes. He held a wanted poster in his hand, and Samuel could see Beatrice's face sketched on it. "Marshal," Samuel said, keeping his voice steady, "what can we do for you?" "Is this your wife?" Garrett asked, holding up the poster. There was no point in lying. The resemblance was clear enough. "Yes, that is my wife, but she is innocent of murder." "That is for a judge to decide. Madam, I need you to come with me." "She is not going anywhere without me," Samuel said. Garrett sighed. "Sir, you should know that helping a wanted fugitive makes you an accessory. You could be charged as well." "I do not care. She is my wife, and I know the truth about what happened in Cheyenne. I am coming with her." The marshal studied them both for a long moment. Something in his expression softened slightly. "All right. But she needs to be held in the jail until we can transport her back to Wyoming Territory for trial. That is not negotiable." Beatrice stepped forward, her chin high despite the fear Samuel knew she must be feeling. "I understand, Marshal. I am ready to go." As they walked through town toward the small jail, people stopped and stared. Samuel kept his hand on Beatrice's elbow, offering whatever support he could through his touch. He saw Mrs. Halst standing outside the boarding house, her hand over her mouth in shock. He saw men he had worked with whispering to each other. The whole town would know by nightfall that sweet Beatrice Abbott was wanted for murder. The jail was a small wooden building with 2 cells. The marshal locked Beatrice in one, his movements efficient but not rough. "I am sorry, madam," he said, and he sounded like he meant it. "I will send a telegram to Cheyenne. Let them know I have you in custody. Someone will come to transport you within a week or so." Samuel pulled up a chair and sat just outside the cell bars. I am not leaving. Suit yourself, Garrett said, but you will have to leave at night. Can't have visitors sleeping in the jail. After the marshal left them alone, Beatrice sank onto the cot in her cell. Samuel reached through the bars to hold her hand. We will get through this, he promised. I am going to send telegrams of my own, find a lawyer, figure out how to prove you are innocent. Samuel, what if we cannot? What if the truth does not matter? Then we will face it together, whatever comes. But I am not giving up. I love you too much to give up. She leaned her head against the bars, as close to him as she could get. I love you too. Thank you for not running, for not trying to pretend you do not know me. You are my wife. I could never do that. Samuel spent that evening writing telegrams to every lawyer he could think of, asking for help and explaining Beatrice's situation. He also wrote to the marshal's office in Cheyenne, requesting any records about Jacob Zimmerman and the robbery. If he could prove that Jacob had a history of violence, that Beatrice had no such history, maybe it would help. He returned to the jail as soon as the sun rose, bringing breakfast for Beatrice. Marshal Garrett let him pass it through the bars, watching with what looked like sympathy. You really love her, don't you? The marshal asked. More than anything, Samuel said. I will be honest with you, son. The evidence against her looks bad. She was there during the robbery, fled the scene, has been running for 8 months. Even if she did not pull the trigger, that does not look good to a jury. What if people testified to her character? What if they said she was honest and good? Garrett shrugged. It might help. Can't hurt anyway, but you should prepare yourself for the possibility that this does not end well. Samuel refused to accept that. Over the next few days, he worked tirelessly to build support for Beatrice. He spoke to Mrs. Halst, who agreed to testify that Beatrice was kind and hardworking. He talked to the women whose clothes Beatrice had mended, the shopkeepers she had done business with, even the preacher who had married them. One by one, people agreed to write letters or testify if needed, saying that the Beatrice they knew could not possibly be a murderer. It was not much, but it was something. 5 days after her arrest, a telegram arrived with news that made Samuel's heart soar. A lawyer in Cheyenne named Douglas Reardon had agreed to take Beatrice's case. He had looked into the matter and found several witnesses who said Jacob Zimmerman had been bragging about shooting the store owner before he was killed by the marshal. More importantly, he had found one witness who remembered seeing Beatrice trying to stop her brother, saw her grabbing for the gun before it went off. Samuel brought the telegram to the jail immediately, reading it aloud to Beatrice through the bars. When he finished, she was crying, but these were tears of hope. Someone remembers, she whispered. Someone knows I tried to stop him. We have a chance, Samuel said, gripping her hands tightly. A real chance. Marshal Garrett had read the telegram too, and his expression was thoughtful. This changes things, he admitted. If Reardon can get sworn statements from those witnesses, the prosecution might be willing to reduce the charges. Maybe even drop the murder charge entirely if they can prove it was Jacob who did the shooting. The next week was agonizing. They waited for news from Cheyenne, for the lawyer to gather evidence and statements, for word on when Beatrice would be transported for trial. Samuel spent every possible moment at the jail, talking to her through the bars, holding her hand, reminding her that they would get through this together. Finally, 2 weeks after her arrest, a wagon arrived with a deputy marshal to transport Beatrice to Wyoming Territory. Samuel had already made arrangements to go with them, hiring a horse and packing supplies for the journey. He would not let his wife face this alone. The trip took 4 days. At night, the deputy would chain Beatrice in whatever jail or secure room was available in the small towns they passed through, and Samuel would sleep nearby, guarding her even though he knew the deputy was doing his job. During the days, they rode together, the deputy allowing Beatrice's hands to be unbound when Samuel promised she would not try to escape. They talked during those long hours on the trail, about everything and nothing. Samuel told her about the progress on their cabin, about the cattle he hoped to buy once this was all over. Beatrice talked about the garden she wanted to plant, about learning to make cheese like her mother used to. They talked about children, about the family they would build together if they were given the chance. Cheyenne was bigger than Hill City, a real town with brick buildings and paved streets. They arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, and Beatrice was immediately taken to the territorial jail. Samuel met with Douglas Reardon that evening in the lawyer's office. Reardon was a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "I will be honest with you, Mr. Abbott. Your wife's case is difficult but not impossible. I have statements from 3 witnesses who saw her try to stop Jacob Zimmerman before he shot Thomas Brennan. I also have records showing that Jacob had a history of violence going back to his time in the war. Your wife has no such history." "So what happens now?" Samuel asked. "There will be a trial. The prosecution has to prove she was complicit in the murder, not just the robbery. My job is to show that she was coerced by her brother, that she tried to prevent the violence, and that she only fled because she feared no one would believe her story." Reardon leaned back in his chair. "The letters you collected from people in Hill City will help establish her current character. The fact that she built a respectable life for herself, got married, was working honestly, all of that plays in our favor. When is the trial?" 2 weeks from now. "Judge Morrison is fair, which is the best we could hope for. In the meantime, you can visit your wife during designated hours. And Mr. Abbott, you should know that the prosecutor has offered a deal. If she pleads guilty to robbery, they will drop the murder charge. She would serve 2 years in prison." Samuel's stomach turned. 2 years. It is better than hanging, which is the penalty for murder, but I think we can do better than 2 years if we go to trial. The evidence is on our side. It is your wife's decision ultimately, but I recommend we fight. Samuel visited Beatrice that evening and told her everything Reardon had said. She listened carefully, her face pale in the dim light of the cell. "What do you think I should do?" she asked. "I think you should fight," Samuel said. "I think you should tell the truth and trust that justice will be served. But Beatrice, if you want to take the deal, to guarantee you will survive this and come back to me in 2 years, I will wait for you. I will be there when you get out, and we will build our life together then." She was quiet for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face. 2 years is a long time, I know, but I would wait 20 if I had to. Beatrice reached through the bars to cup his face with her hand. "I want to fight. I want to stand up in that courtroom and tell the truth about what happened. I am tired of running, tired of hiding. Even if it means risking everything, I need to do this." Samuel kissed her palm. "Then we fight." The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. Reardon interviewed Beatrice extensively, preparing her testimony. Samuel met with the character witnesses who would be coming from Hill City, making sure everyone knew what to say. He sat through strategy sessions where Reardon explained how the trial would proceed, what questions would be asked, how the jury selection would work. Through it all, Samuel never left Cheyenne. He took a room at a cheap hotel and spent every allowed moment at the jail with his wife. They talked about everything except what might happen if the trial went badly. Neither of them could bear to voice those fears aloud. The trial began on a Thursday morning in late September. The courtroom was packed with spectators, curious townspeople who had read about the case in the newspaper. Samuel sat in the front row, directly behind the defense table, where Beatrice sat beside Reardon. She wore a simple gray dress that made her look young and vulnerable, her dark hair pulled back in a modest bun. Judge Morrison was an older man with a stern face but kind eyes. He ran his courtroom with efficiency, brooking no nonsense from either side. The prosecutor was a man named Hendricks, ambitious and aggressive, determined to get a conviction. Jury selection took the entire first day. Reardon carefully questioned each potential juror about their views on women, on family loyalty, on reasonable doubt. By the end of the day, they had a jury of 12 men, mostly middle-aged, who seemed fair-minded enough. The prosecution presented their case first. They called witnesses who testified about the robbery, about Thomas Brennan's death, about Beatrice's flight from Cheyenne. Hendricks painted a picture of a woman who was just as guilty as her brother, who had helped plan the robbery and stood by while an innocent man was murdered. It was brutal to sit through. Samuel watched Beatrice grow paler with each witness, each damning piece of evidence, but Reardon remained calm, occasionally objecting but mostly letting the prosecution tell their story. Then it was the defense's turn. Reardon called the witnesses who had seen Beatrice try to stop Jacob, who testified that she had been crying and begging her brother not to hurt anyone. He called people from Hill City who spoke about Beatrice's good character, her honesty, her hard work. Mrs. Halls took the stand and wept as she talked about what a kind person Beatrice was, how she had been nothing but respectful and decent. Finally, Reardon called Beatrice herself to testify. She took the stand with shaking hands, swore to tell the truth, and then looked out at the courtroom. Samuel nodded encouragingly from his seat, and she took a deep breath before beginning her story. She told them everything. About losing her parents, about Jacob raising her, about how the war had changed him. She described the plan to rob the store, how she had only agreed because Jacob said no one would get hurt. She spoke about trying to grab the gun, about the horror of seeing Thomas Brennan fall, about Jacob's wild eyes afterward, and her own paralyzing fear. "I knew I should have stayed and told the truth," she said, her voice breaking. "But I was terrified. Jacob was the only family I had left, and I did not know what to do, so I ran. I have regretted that decision every day since." Hendricks cross-examined her aggressively, trying to catch her in contradictions, trying to make her admit she had been complicit. But Beatrice stuck to her story, answering each question honestly, even when the answers made her look bad. She never tried to excuse her actions, only to explain them. When she finally stepped down, Samuel could see she was exhausted, but she had done well. She had told the truth with dignity and remorse, and he hoped it would be enough. The closing arguments took an entire afternoon. Hendricks argued that Beatrice was guilty regardless of who pulled the trigger, that she had participated in a crime that led to a man's death. Reardon argued that Beatrice was a victim herself, coerced by her brother, and that she had tried to prevent the violence that occurred. Then the jury was sent to deliberate. The waiting was agony. Samuel sat with Reardon in the hallway outside the courtroom, neither of them speaking much. Hours passed. The sun set and lamps were lit throughout the courthouse. Still, the jury deliberated. Finally, near midnight, word came that they had reached a verdict. The courtroom filled again, everyone tense and silent. Beatrice was brought in, and Samuel caught her eye, trying to send her strength through his gaze alone. The jury filed in, their faces unreadable. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Morrison asked. "We have, Your Honor," the foreman said, standing. "On the charge of murder, how do you find?" Samuel held his breath. "Not guilty." The relief was so intense that Samuel felt dizzy. Beatrice's knees buckled and Reardon had to steady her. But the judge was speaking again. "On the charge of robbery, how do you find?" "Guilty, Your Honor." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Morrison banged his gavel for order. "Mrs. Abbott, please stand for sentencing." Beatrice stood, and Samuel stood with her, though the bailiff told him to sit. He ignored the man, keeping his eyes on his wife. Judge Morrison looked at Beatrice for a long moment. "Mrs. Abbott, you have been found guilty of robbery. This is a serious crime, and normally I would sentence you to several years in prison. However, I have listened carefully to the testimony in this case. I believe you were under the influence of your brother, that you did not plan this crime, and that you genuinely tried to prevent the tragedy that occurred. I also see that you have worked to build an honest life for yourself since." He paused, and Samuel's heart pounded. "Therefore, I sentence you to 1 year in prison, with the possibility of parole after 6 months for good behavior. I hope you will use this time to reflect on your choices and to prepare for the law-abiding life I believe you are capable of living. 1 year. Only 1 year, maybe 6 months." Samuel felt tears streaming down his face. It was not perfect, but it was so much better than they had feared. Beatrice turned to look at him, and she was crying too, but smiling through the tears. "Thank you," she mouthed. They allowed Samuel to speak to her briefly before she was taken to the territorial prison. He held her hands through the bars of the holding cell, memorizing her face. "6 months," he said. "I will wait 6 months, and then you will come home to me." "You should go back to Hill City," Beatrice said. "Finish our cabin, buy those cattle, start building the life we planned." "I will, and when you get out, everything will be ready for you. I love you," she whispered. "I love you too, more than anything." The 6 months that followed were the longest of Samuel's life. He returned to Hill City and threw himself into work, finishing the cabin and building a small barn. He bought 10 head of cattle with money he borrowed from Mrs. Halst, who had become a fierce supporter of both him and Beatrice. He cleared land for a garden and built a chicken coop. Every week, he wrote Beatrice long letters telling her about the progress, about the life waiting for her. She wrote back when she could, short notes that he treasured. She was working in the prison laundry, staying out of trouble, counting down the days until her parole hearing. Samuel traveled to Cheyenne for that hearing, sitting nervously in the room while a panel of officials questioned Beatrice about her behavior and her plans for the future. She answered calmly, explaining that she had a husband and a ranch waiting for her, that she wanted nothing more than to live honestly and quietly. They granted her parole. Samuel was waiting outside the prison gates on the day she was released, standing beside a wagon with copper tied behind it. When Beatrice walked out in the simple dress he had sent her, squinting in the bright spring sunlight, he ran to her. She ran too, and they collided in an embrace that felt like coming home. "It is over," she said, crying into his shoulder. "It is finally over." "It is over," he agreed, holding her tightly. "And now our real life begins." They traveled back to Hill City together, stopping at night to camp under the stars. On the 3rd night, as they lay together in their bedroll, Samuel made love to his wife for the first time in 6 months. It was desperate and tender, and filled with all the longing and love that had sustained them through the separation. When they finally reached their ranch, Samuel stopped the wagon at the top of the hill, overlooking their valley. The cabin stood sturdy and welcoming, smoke curling from the chimney where he had left a fire burning that morning. Cattle grazed in the pasture beyond, and the creek sparkled in the afternoon sun. "Welcome home, Mrs. Abbott," Samuel said. Beatrice looked at the life spread before them, at everything they had fought so hard to achieve. "It is perfect," she whispered. "It is absolutely perfect." They settled into their life together with joy and gratitude. Beatrice planted her garden and Samuel tended the growing herd. They worked side by side during the days and held each other close at night. The past was behind them, dealt with and resolved, and the future stretched out full of possibility. In the fall of 1877, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. Samuel was so happy he could barely speak, just held her and laughed and cried at the same time. They spent the winter preparing for the baby, Samuel building a cradle and Beatrice sewing tiny clothes. Their son was born in March of 1878, a healthy boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. They named him Jacob Thomas, after both the brother who had led Beatrice astray and the man whose death had brought her so much grief. It was a way of honoring the past while choosing a different future. "He will be better than both of them," Beatrice said as she nursed their son for the first time. "He will have the chances they never did." "He will have love," Samuel said, stroking the baby's soft head. "That is the most important thing." Their ranch prospered. Samuel proved to be a skilled cattleman, and Beatrice's garden produced more vegetables than they could eat themselves, so she sold the excess in town. They slowly paid back Mrs. Halst and began to build savings again. More importantly, they built a reputation as honest, hardworking people. The story of Beatrice's trial and redemption became known, and rather than being shunned, they found themselves respected for facing their troubles head-on. In 1880, Beatrice gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah Rose. She was a happy baby who rarely cried, content to watch the world with curious blue eyes. Jacob, now 2 years old, was initially suspicious of this interloper, but quickly became fiercely protective of his little sister. Life fell into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew, and the ranch expanded. Samuel hired help during the busy seasons, young men looking to learn the cattle business. Beatrice continued her sewing work when she had time, but mostly she focused on raising their children and managing the household. They had weathered so much together. The fear and uncertainty of Beatrice's wanted status, the trial, the separation, the hard work of building a life from nothing. All of it had made their love stronger, deeper, more resilient. One evening in the summer of 1883, as they sat on the porch watching Jacob and Sarah play near the creek, Beatrice leaned her head on Samuel's shoulder. "Do you ever think about that day in Hill City?" she asked. "When you bought my debt?" "Sometimes," Samuel admitted. "I think about how different our lives would be if I had not been there that day, if I had not acted on impulse." "Do you regret it?" "Any of it?" Samuel pulled her closer. "Not for a single second. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Beatrice. You and our children, this life we have built together. All the difficulties we faced were worth it to get here." "I feel the same way," she said softly. "I was so lost when you found me, so certain my life was over. You gave me hope when I had none. You loved me when I did not think I deserved love. You fought for me when I could not fight for myself." "You did the same for me," Samuel said. "You gave me purpose, gave me someone to build a life for. Before you, I was just drifting, working toward some vague dream of a ranch someday. You made it real." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play in the golden light of sunset. This was what they had fought for, this peace, this normalcy, this simple joy of being together. The past would always be part of their story, but it no longer defined them. They had chosen each other, chosen love, chosen to build something good out of difficult circumstances. In 1885, Beatrice became pregnant again, this time with twins, a boy they named Peter and a girl they called Lily. The house was chaotic with 4 young children, but it was a happy chaos. Samuel built an addition to the cabin to give them more room, and Beatrice somehow managed to keep everyone fed, clothed, and loved. Jacob, now 7, helped his father with the ranch work, already showing an aptitude for handling cattle. Sarah, at 5, was her mother's shadow, learning to cook and sew. The twins were 2 years old, getting into everything and making everyone laugh with their antics. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. There were hard winters when they lost cattle, dry summers when the creek ran low. There were illnesses and injuries, the normal trials of frontier life. But through it all, Samuel and Beatrice faced everything together, their love the foundation on which their family stood. By 1890, their ranch was one of the most successful in the area. They had expanded their land holdings, increased their herd, and built a proper house to replace the original cabin. Jacob, now 12, was already talking about taking over the ranch someday. Sarah, at 10, had become an accomplished seamstress like her mother. Peter and Lily, now 5, attended the new school that had opened in Hill City. Samuel was 40 years old now, his face weathered by years of outdoor work, his hair showing gray at the temples. Beatrice was 37, still beautiful, her green eyes as bright as the day he had first seen her on that auction block. They had grown older together, their love deepening with each passing year. One autumn evening, after the children were in bed, they walked together out to the spot where Samuel had first proposed to her all those years ago. The view was the same. Hill City spread out below them, the vast Dakota sky above, the whole world feeling both infinite and intimate at once. "Do you remember what you asked me here?" Beatrice said, smiling. "How could I forget? I was terrified you would say no. I was terrified you would realize what a terrible risk you were taking on a wanted woman." Samuel took her hand, running his thumb over her knuckles. "Best risk I ever took. Beatrice, these past 14 years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. Watching you become a mother, building this ranch together, growing old beside you, I would not trade a single moment of it. Even the hard parts," she teased gently. "Even the trial and the separation." "Even those," he said seriously, "because they taught us what we are capable of together. They proved that our love is strong enough to weather anything." Beatrice moved into his arms, resting her head against his chest where she could hear his heartbeat. "I love you, Samuel Abbott. I have loved you since you burned that wanted poster and chose to believe in me. I will love you until my last breath. And I love you, Beatrice Abbott. From that first moment I saw you on that auction block, I knew you were someone special. I just did not know you would become my everything." They stood there holding each other as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold. Behind them, their house glowed with lamplight, full of the children they had raised and the life they had built. Ahead of them stretched years more, God willing, of this simple, profound happiness. It had not been an easy road. They had both made mistakes, faced consequences, endured separation and fear and uncertainty. But they had also found redemption, second chances, and a love that transcended the circumstances that brought them together. Samuel had bought a woman's debt on an impulse, trying to save someone who reminded him of his own loss. He had never expected to find his soulmate standing on that auction block, clutching a wanted poster with her own face on it. Beatrice had been running, hiding, certain her past would destroy any chance at a future. She had never expected to find a man who would love her anyway, who would fight for her, who would wait for her and build a home for her to return to. Together, they had created something neither could have achieved alone: a family, a ranch, a legacy of love and redemption that would outlast them both. Their children would grow up knowing that people can change, that mistakes do not define you forever, that love is worth fighting for. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Samuel thought about all the choices that had led them to this moment. The choice to act when he saw Beatrice in trouble. Her choice to trust him with the truth. Their choice to fight for justice rather than take the easy way out. The choice to wait, to hope, to believe in a future together. Every choice had mattered. Every moment had been worth it. Inside, they checked on their sleeping children, pulling blankets up and kissing foreheads. Jacob was sprawled across his bed, already too big for it, dreaming of being a rancher like his father. Sarah slept with her sewing project clutched in her hands, even in sleep dedicated to her craft. Peter and Lily were curled up together in the bed they still shared, inseparable even in dreams. These children were their legacy, their future, their hope made flesh. Samuel and Beatrice retired to their own room, the one they had shared for over a decade now, and held each other in the darkness. They did not need words anymore. They knew each other too well for that. The language of their love was written in tender touches, in the comfortable silence of two souls perfectly matched. Outside, the Dakota night was clear and cold, full of stars that had witnessed their entire journey. The ranch slept peacefully, cattle settled in the pastures, horses quiet in the barn. Everything they had worked for, everything they had risked and sacrificed and fought to achieve, was finally, completely theirs. The years continued to unfold, bringing graduations and weddings, grandchildren and golden anniversaries. Samuel and Beatrice grew old together on their ranch, surrounded by family and the land they loved. They never forgot where they came from, never took for granted the miracle of their unlikely love story. When people asked how they met, they told the truth, that Samuel had bought Beatrice's debt at an auction in Hill City, South Dakota, back in 1876. That she had been hiding a terrible secret, and he had chosen to protect her anyway. That they had fallen in love while building a life together, and that love had carried them through trials that would have broken lesser bonds. It was a story of redemption and second chances, of courage and forgiveness, of two people who had found each other at their lowest moments and built something beautiful together. It was a love story for the ages, born in the rough and tumble world of the Wild West, tempered by hardship and strengthened by unwavering commitment. And it all started on that dusty afternoon when a cowboy bought a woman's debt, without knowing she was holding a wanted poster with her own face on it, running from a past that threatened to destroy her. He had saved her that day, but in truth they had saved each other, finding in one another the courage to face the truth and the strength to build a future worth fighting for. Their love had conquered all: fear, injustice, separation, and time itself. It was a testament to what two people can achieve when they choose each other, every single day, no matter what obstacles stand in their way. Samuel and Beatrice Abbott lived long, full lives surrounded by the family they had created and the land they had built together. When they finally passed, years apart, they were laid to rest on a hill overlooking their ranch, side by side as they had been in life. Their headstones bore simple inscriptions with their names and dates, but the true measure of their lives was not carved in stone. It lived on in their descendants, in the ranch that bore their name, in the story passed down through generations of how a cowboy and a wanted woman found love against all odds in the wild Dakota territory. It was a story of hope, proving that no matter how dark your past or how uncertain your future, love can light the way home. And that was the greatest legacy of all.